There we go. And my name is Brianne Vales. I'm the program manager for the Homeless Contribution Tax Credit. If I haven't met you before, I'm so glad that you're on this call. If we have met, thanks for joining again. I also wanted to introduce Sydney McCleary. So several of you have been in touch with Sydney already, but I think this is her first video call. So now you get to put a face with her name. She is the coordinator for HCTC. And we also on the call have Stephanie Casillas. She is our data manager who has done so much behind the scenes to make this program a possibility. And so thank you so much to Stephanie for just being flexible and creative in making sure our processes are working and meeting our deadline so that we can even provide tax certificates for folks at this time. So yes, Stephanie has been doing a lot behind the scenes. So I know I've received appreciation from many of you. Definitely appreciate that. But Stephanie really deserves a lot of that praise and thanks as well. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping details, please keep yourself muted and go ahead and raise your hand if you do have a question. We will try to field questions at the end of the slide, and we have a Q&A time reserved for the end of the presentation as well. We should have plenty of time, 15 minutes or so, to answer questions you may have. And you can also put anything in the chat as well. For those who are just joining, please go ahead and put your name and organization in the chat so that we can know who's here. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it on to Sydney.
Hi, everyone. Like Brianne said, I'm the new coordinator for the Homeless Contribution Tax Credit Program. I know I've been able to email with a few of you so far, but I'm really glad to be able to see and learn a few more names for people who are involved in our program today. And again, I just want to reiterate Brianne's thanks for joining us today. So for today's agenda, we're going to go over a formatting and style standards guide that we've put together. This is just based off of what we've seen from contribution forms so far and hopefully help to establish those best practices as we move forward. We'll also look into the current contribution form. I know we have a few new details that will hopefully make things a little smoother on your end as you're submitting contributions. And then I'm sure what you have all been eagerly waiting for is a Salesforce sneak peek. So we'll be able to take a little glimpse at that as well. And like Brianne said, we'll have plenty of time for question and answers at the end. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for the formatting and style guide, like I said, this was really something that we thought of as we've started reviewing more and more contributions now that we're almost 5 months into the program, which is crazy. And we don't have the Salesforce up and running just yet. We want to make sure that we're getting the program started on the right foot. And what we're finding is just having accurate data is extremely important. I'm sure you hear this in other forms of your job, but this is also true in the HCTC program. So in the current process that we have, Brianne and myself, and like Brianne said, especially Stephanie, she's doing tons of background work, reviewing all of the contributions that we're getting, reviewing the data. We're really taking the time to have our eyes on everything that you all are submitting to us to ensure that certificates, especially those with immediate frequency, are going out 100% accurate. There is only so much like data validation and error checking systems that we can put into the technology and the database. So once again, we're really making sure our eyes are on this, doing a double, even triple check of the data that is being submitted to us so that the certificates you're sending out to your donors are accurate and good to go. catching any data errors and putting a lot of focus on this now is super duper important so that as our program grows and as more contributions are coming in, especially when Salesforce is up and more of you start submitting your contributions, we want to prevent any data inconsistencies from happening as we get more and more of them. So we don't want this to snowball into a super big problem. So we figured that's why it would be a good idea today to talk about data accuracy and proper formatting before we get too deep into the program. Having as few problems with our information as possible helps us to remove discrepancies and having as little ambiguity. And also helps to establish and maintain credibility in our program, both in our relationship with all of you and also in your relationship with your donors. We really do not want to send out certificates that have inaccurate personal information on there. So inaccurate social security numbers, names, addresses, any of that, we want to remove that from even being a possibility. We also want everyone to have complete confidence in the system. And so creating this best practice is really the most efficient way for us to move forward in having this continue. And we also want to make sure we're maintaining great relationships with all of you. I know some of you have received data validation emails from me already. I want to respect your time as much as possible. I know that all of you have so much else that you need to get done. So the less often that we need to reach out for data verification, the quicker that we're able to get those certificates to you, get reports to you, anything like that. And so we're all saving time by having fewer data check-ins. So again, with creating this formatting and style guide, again, just establishing those best practices early. Brianna and I are really big on that. We're super excited. We have the unique opportunity that this is a newer program, so we can start things on the right foot. And so having this style guide will hopefully help all of you follow that. The style guide will be going out after the presentation. And so I'll go over just a few of the common errors that we're seeing so far. But what we're really hoping is that as you are all submitting contributions both now in the current form on our website and also once Salesforce is up, hopefully you can have this format guide up on the side and you can follow it along as you're entering things in. So some of the common errors that we're seeing are, first and foremost, this may seem super self-explanatory, but punctuation. I'm not trying to be like the grammar police or the punctuation police, anything like that, but it really does make a difference. And the best example that I could think of is when you're entering your organization's name, you could be nonprofit co without a period or nonprofit co with a period. Either way would probably be accurate. However, in our database, when you make that tiny difference in entering a period or not, that then creates two separate organizations in our database, which means to pull your reports or when looking up certificates, we might see two different organizations. We know from knowing you and communicating with all of you, it's probably the same one. But again, as we grow, this might be harder and harder for us to find. And so hopefully you and any staff that you have submitting contributions could all just establish your best practice for how you want your organization written out. Because again, we don't want any duplicates or anything in there. This is also true. Punctuation can come in with names as well. This could be for someone's last name, like if it's O'Reilly or anything like that, or it could be in first names too. Can you tap the space? Yeah, thank you. Okay, so next we'll go into other ways that we might end up with duplicate data or mismatched data. Jacob O'Reilly, just so that you all know, this is a made-up name. This is none of your donors. I just want to make sure that's clear. Jacob O'Reilly is just a great name for us to use for all of the ways that we could input data in different variations. So again, with the punctuation, you'll see just going one line down, Jacob O'Reilly's tax ID name is that first line at the top. But by removing the apostrophe in his last name, that then creates a second form of his name where we could have two different Jacob O'Reillys with potentially monthly contributions or whatever it may be. And we would then have to double check with you like, hey, is this the same person? Is it not? What's the right way to spell their name? Same thing goes with the capitalization of the R in the last name as well. Again, I really don't want to be the grammar or the punctuation police or anything like that. Just showing you all how this can lead to so many variations of one donor, and we want it to be accurate on their certificate. So just making sure you're double, triple checking how those names are spelled on their tax ID, however you have that confirmed on your end, is super important. Another big thing that we're seeing are nicknames. And so somebody named Jacob, you might know them personally as Jake. They might have been a donor for years and years. You know them one-on-one. So Jake O'Reilly, you don't even think twice about entering it in that way. Totally understandable. But again, we just want that tax ID name, that first line up there of his name, to be entered correctly. Again, following tax ID, matching social security number, which I'll get to, all of that good stuff. Please make sure to enter their full accurate name. The last one on this slide that I would not have even thought of before starting this job. And so I don't blame any of you. We're all human for doing it, but spaces. I know you would think like that really shouldn't make all of the difference, but it truly does. So on that fourth line down, you can see between Jacob's first and last name, there's 2 spaces there. And then on the 6th line down, there's a space before his first name. And even though this is such a small difference, and you, again, like I wouldn't think anything of it before I started combing through this data, it again can create a whole other donor in our system. And I know sometimes if you're copying and pasting, I know I do it sometimes. If I'm copying somebody's name, I get the space before or after the word I'm copying. Just make sure you're really looking through that. Being sure that you are like really double checking everything and looking at it with very detailed eyes so that we don't have that. It's totally okay. Like I said, we're all human and we can definitely check on that for you, but just the more that we can get this consistent as it's inputted, the easier it'll be for all of us. And so the last thing I want to talk about are social security numbers. So let's say John Smith and Jane Smith here, maybe they're married. They both contribute to your organization. However, John Smith is the one who has a social security number ending in 1234, but the donor that you've put on the contribution form and the certificate is his wife, Jane. So then your certificate would come up saying Jane Smith, social security number 1234, and all the other contribution information. Obviously, having somebody else's social security number and their name not matching on a certificate is something we really want to avoid. So making sure that when you're entering any spousal information, that it is their full name and their social security number. We can't have it mismatched, unfortunately. Another big thing that we'll see is having social security numbers with the wrong name. John Smith's 1234 social security number might be with Jacob O'Reilly. We will definitely make sure to double check that with you before even printing the certificate and sending it over to you. But yeah, just keep that in mind that it's really important to double check these things as much as possible. If you take anything from everything I've blabbed about formatting and style guides today, just keep in mind that consistency is key and that double and maybe even triple checking your information is super important. Rachel, I see you have a question. Go ahead.
Hey, Sydney. So on the current contribution form, we can put both both like a primary name and then a spouse name, does that kind of take care of that? If we just like, if we put both names and then one of their social security numbers, are we good there?
I would say just make sure the person that you're putting first as the main donor may put their social security number, and then the spouse, leave them as the spouse, and you could leave their social security number off. That way you don't have to get both social security numbers if you don't want to, because I understand you don't want to keep track of all of that data, but yes, keep it that way for sure.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
also in Salesforce, we're not even going to be collecting the spouse information, just so that when we were looking at the personal identifying information, we just wanted to only collect what we actually absolutely had to. So that was one decision that has been made since that contribution form was created, is we're not going to continue to collect the spouse information.
Okay. Can I ask a follow-up question then?
Sure. Mhm.
So what if we have, a married couple, we have John's name and social security number. Let's say the gift is over $5,000, so we need to give you support. The check is made from Jane Smith's account. Do we need to then go and get her social and submit it under her name?
So John, in that case, John would not be on the account at all. His name isn't on the check at any
Yeah, let's
point.
pretend that it happens some of the time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we can address that maybe and get back to you. I think just my initial reaction would be that we would want that documentation for the name to match. I understand that they would be filing jointly. But then if that donation was technically from Jane, then we would need to send that certificate to Jane.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Great question. But yeah, everything on the style guide and formatting guide will go out. There will be a bit more information on that. And again, if you have anything as you're filling out contribution forms that you're like, ooh, this might be good on the style guide, please feel free to reach out to me. I will be happy to edit it to make it as easy to follow for all of you as possible. And again, just remember, consistency and double checking everything will really make everything go so much more efficiently. And so with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Brianne.
Thank you so much, Sydney, for your detail and going through this, and for creating this guide that's going to be super helpful, and we'll send that out after the training. Any other questions on this before we move on? Okay. So our current contribution form is for you all as nonprofits to enter contributions while we're waiting on Salesforce. And there's actually a new feature that we wanted to show you. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the contribution form. Normally, when you would click on the link that is linked on our website for this form, the form would just pop up on this main screen. Now there's actually a login feature that will allow you to view your previous submissions. So again, with the theme of checking data, this will allow you to double check a previous entry. If for your first time, you will need to set up an email and password in order to log in. I have already done so. So when I log in, it's going to take me into the form. And so after you log in, you'll be able to view the contribution form. It looks just the same as previously. And I can start filling it out if I want to. And then say, oh, I got a phone call. I want to make sure and save this before I forget. So I'm going to come down here and I can actually save this form to come back to later. And now the form is here under my forms. This first one is the one I just saved. So if I hit continue, start form, it's going to have those edits I had made to the form right there saved. And how to get to that from here, you actually go and click on home up here in the top part of the page. And you can go back to your to-dos. To go back to those in progress, should never really have anything in progress. And then done is actually those previous submissions if you have previous contributions that you've already submitted. So I have 2 test entries here that I can show you. I can download a PDF. And it has all of the information from that previous form here on the page. The social security number is actually redacted for security, but the other information like name, address, contribution amount, all of that can still be viewed here. So I see, Carter, you're happy about this. Yeah, we're glad to be able to roll this out because a lot of people will get questions. Did this actually go through or whatever? And well, now you can be able to check that yourself. And if you're ever on this page and wanting to go back to the form because you have another one to submit, just go to directory, HCTC contributions, open, and it will take you back to the start form page. So any questions on this new feature for the form? Awesome. Going to go back to the presentation here.
Brianna,
I also have
it
a
looks
couple of
like-
notes.
Oh, sorry. It looks like Jan has a question. If our nonprofits have more than one admin and multiple logins, see the same submission.
It would have to be the same email and password would be able to see previous submissions. So if the other submissions for your coworker are under a different login name, so email and password, then you would not be able to see theirs. Unfortunately, it's not connected by organization. It's just by individual user. But that's a good question. Yes, for the Durango office and Denver office that you will need to coordinate who's submitting what. We also have started to do a weekly report. So if we send out new certificates for you during a week, we Sydney actually is sending out an email of a report to show you, okay, these are your history of submissions and these are the new certificates that went out this week, just to have better clarity on that. And then there's also a question on the business entity. And for a business entity, if you click on the little I button here, you'll see if your business has an FEIN, then you'll just put zeros in the social security number field. The reason we have social security number as an option here is because some single member LLCs have not applied for an EIN. They just use their social security number to file their taxes. So technically there could be a business with a social security number. And yes, Salesforce, I'll show you in a little bit in a minute, but Salesforce will have a memory. Your whole nonprofit organization will be connected with your user login. Any contributions entered for your nonprofit or certificates sent out, those will be associated with your nonprofit and you'll be able to see a history there. This is just kind of our short-term solution where if you're an individual user, you'll be able to see that history. And also another note on that, unfortunately, I believe you'll only be able to see submissions after you've created your login. So if you're an organization where you've submitted 10 submissions already earlier this year, those are not going to show up here because you hadn't created a login at that time. But moving forward, you'll be able to see what those contributions are. That's another note because we just turned this feature on this week. We've got some questions on certificates and contributions. I'm going to table those until later because some of that might be covered when we go over Salesforce. I will make a note on the quarterly certificates. So if your organization has chosen to go with quarterly certificates in their frequency, we do ask that if you submit the contributions for a donor, that you'll just give a total for that quarter for that donor. An example of this would be if someone gave $100 a month for 3 months, you'll just go ahead and submit a contribution for $300 with the date of donation associated with the last, the donation that was donated last. And so this will help in some of our streamlining to have just all totaled in one contribution submission. Another aspect that I wanted to share is that our certificates for the quarterly frequency, we've decided to process those after Salesforce is implemented. The reason for this is just to make our data transfer as clean as possible and to make sure that it's smooth. So we're not issuing some certificates now and then some need to be issued later after Salesforce is launched, because we have pretty much given a grace period on this first deadline for this first quarter, because we are waiting on Salesforce. We're giving basically waiving the deadline. I would encourage everyone that if you have not submitted a contribution yet, it might be a good idea. I know a lot of you were waiting on Salesforce. It might be a good idea just to try 1 or 2 to see how it goes. I know a couple of nonprofits, they've tried their first ones and they were like, oh, this question came up, or I didn't expect this aspect. And so even if you're wanting to wait until the bulk of your entries are for Salesforce, I would encourage you to go ahead and try it out and see what questions you come up with, just for your internal processes. So going along with Sydney's presentation on the formatting style guide, that style guide will actually apply to you as the nonprofit. But if you ask your donors to submit contributions once Salesforce is launched, this will also apply to them as well. Because with Salesforce, we will have a donor interface, which I will show you, and we'll have you being able to have a login to Salesforce. You'll be able to enter contributions there as well. And so we're going to have 2 kind of players here entering data. And we want to make sure we're all kind of following the same guidelines for all the reasons that Sydney explained earlier. And so nonprofits, you will review each donor submissions before it is approved. So that's a good thing. That's a good check and balance that we have there. But we also want donors to be knowledgeable of how to accurately submit things. So I wanted to kind of show you these different pages so that you can kind of visualize what it might look like. These are still in the test phase. These are not the final version. And then also, just keep that in mind. And then also on the community user page, I'm not going to be able to have time to go into detail on everything at this time, but I do want to focus on the contribution and certificate features and just give, like I said, a sneak peek. And we will have a training later on that goes into detail on how to use Salesforce totally. So we're not going to leave you in the dark at all. But when Salesforce launches, we're going to have training materials for you. But hopefully this will give you an idea of what to look forward to. So first, the donor contribution page. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. So we did add some privacy statements to really emphasize transparency when it comes to the data. And so we did add an acknowledgement page here. And then this is, again, the donor page. This is what a donor will see when they are trying to access their Salesforce page and enter a contribution. And so first off, they're going to need to know your nonprofit name. Some of you, this is going to be straightforward. Some of you actually go by a DBA, a doing business as. And so they'll need to know what name is associated with your tax ID. And so this is the test organization I have here. And next, the donor will select the project for your organization. So if you just have one, easy peasy. If you have more than one, they'll need to know what project they actually donated to, and they'll select that. And then this is where they'll submit their information similar to the nonprofit form that we're using now. So address, email, phone are both not required. And then this is the contribution details page. And this can be quite important because there are some contributions that might not be allowable, such as a donation through an intermediary organization like Colorado Gives, or a credit card donation. The credit card fee is not eligible for a tax credit. And so if someone gave $503 with their credit card, including the fee, the credit card fee was $3, then they'll actually need to submit $500 for that contribution. And so that's another aspect to think about. And we will create guidelines for donors as well, so that they can be aware of what to be aware of as they're submitting everything. But I think it's also helpful to be aware of these aspects. So I'm just going to submit a sample here. Documentation. So this is where they would upload a file. The only requirement is if the donation is over $5,000, but in theory, they could still submit an attachment document for less. And then submitted by name should just be the donor's name. Should be for whoever's submitting it. So hit next here. There's a summary where they can double check everything. Hit next. Success, it was submitted. And next, it actually goes into a queue for you as the organization to review that submission. So I'm gonna pull up the community user page here. And you as a community user will also have a privacy notice here as well, just so that we're transparent on expectations. And then you'll be able to log in. And then your page is going to have multiple tabs at the top here. And like I said, I'm not going to be going into each of these in detail. However, I will focus on the contributions. And my Zoom is covering up that tab. I'm trying to, let me see here. Okay. So this is where you could actually submit a contribution yourself as the nonprofit. You could hit new contribution and submit it, and it looks very similar to the donor page I just showed you. This is a full history of previous contributions. So these are all tests that we've been testing in this sandbox. Thank you to the nonprofits who have been helping us test, by the way. We appreciate it. Draft contributions to review. This is where you would go to look at those those donor submissions. And this is the one I just submitted just now with you on this call. And so you're able to look here at some of the information, their name, address, tax ID. But up here, this is where you would go through and approve or decline. So if you needed to decline it, something was inaccurate, you could hit decline and put a reason there. And then the donor would receive an email that it was declined. If you wanted to approve it, you would select approve, enter the correct tax year. And this is the mechanism for searching for the donor. So that tax ID, so the social security number, business ID, or if the donor has an ITIN. Those are the 3 number options that this search is for. And it looks like, whoa, there's some different donors. So I submitted this under my name. Looks like there's a different number with that same social security number. So this is a data checking feature where in theory, we should not get any duplicates on social security numbers. Let's say for the sake of testing that this all is accurate. I'm gonna go ahead and say, yes, this donor is correct. I'm gonna review the donation amount, the date, everything looks good. I'm gonna approve it, submit. And that actually was a cue for a tax certificate to be created in Salesforce. And as you can see here, there's a record of decision. It was approved by this test username, but it would be your name, whatever you were logged in as. So now we're going to go to the tax certificates page tab. Pending to deliver. This is the one that was just submitted. So as you can see, this is the tax credit certificate. You can actually view the tax credit certificate here on Salesforce. And you can actually trigger an email to be sent to the donor. And my page is being a little slow here. But yeah, this is the tax credit certificate that was produced because this nonprofit chose immediate certificate frequency. If your organization is doing annual, you would not see any certificates there until the end of the year. So that is important to note. But here, if I wanted to go ahead and send this to the donor, I would send it here by hitting the send button. And what that does is it sends an email to the donor's email that's on file. And then there's a link and a certificate key. That certificate key is unique to the donor, and I'll show you how they're able to verify. So I have a sample certificate key here. And they put in actually their name and the last 4 of their social to verify they are who they say they are. They're the ones who deserve this tax credit certificate. So it says, click here to download and print your certificate. Click there. The donor is able to save this PDF to use for when they file their taxes. So that's how that process would work if a donor were to submit a contribution. If you were to submit a contribution, it would also create a tax credit certificate. It just wouldn't have that approval process there because you're submitting it yourself. But because this example was a donor submission, there you that just had that data checking opportunity for you as the nonprofit. How do we, so I'm going to look at a few of the questions in the chat here. Does anyone else have some questions related to what I just reviewed? So I'm going to try to go in order here. So yes, Kim, all the entries were transferred to the new system. So if you're using the contribution form now, we will transfer that data to Salesforce. Jalindra asked if an organization is doing annual certificates, will you get a confirmation of completion? But for the certificates are created at the end of the year. So hopefully you saw there on the contributions tab, you can view all of those there that have been entered. How do we get the project name? Do we have separate counties and programs? Janet, I believe we met previously, and we do have 2 projects for your organization. We separated out the rural and non-rural. I can email those 2 project names to you now to make sure those are accurate, but in Salesforce, you'll be able to view those 2 projects and the totals contributions to each. Jan asks, could you have edited the dollar amount to from 505 to 500? Yes. That's a good question. Stephanie, do you know if I know you can deny or not approve a certificate, but can someone edit a contribution? I believe so. Yes, this is in draft status. So I'm selecting edit. So I am able to edit the donation amount here. So yes, you will be able to edit. If it is an incorrect amount that the donor submitted, you will be able to edit it. On the donation entry page, why does it default to in kind? I didn't even notice that before, so we can make a note of that and see if our developer can change that. Robert asked a good question. Will we always be required to send the tax certificate? That answer is yes, because of how the statute is written for this tax credit. It actually says the nonprofit needs to issue the tax credit certificate. So we started out the year not completely following that protocol, but with Salesforce, we are going to enforce that portion of the statute. Do all the projects relate to homelessness? Yes. All projects have to be vetted and approved by the Office of Homeless Initiatives. So all the projects within the Salesforce system have gone through the eligibility process, or if you were a part of the enterprise zone and had a project in their tax credit program, those were transferred over to HCTC. And Carter, no, the donor feature is to have options for you. If you prefer to enter all contributions yourself, absolutely you can do that. Some nonprofits preferred, because of the Social Security number, to put some of that responsibility in the hands of donors. That's up to you and your organization. For quarterly submissions, how long will we have after the end of the quarter to submit? This first quarter, like I said, that deadline is waived, but usually 30 days after the quarter. So this first quarter would have been April 31st. Second quarter would be August 31st, and et cetera. I'm going to go ahead and talk about our future plans. Like we said, we will send a follow-up email with the recording and style guide. We do need to get the recording up on our YouTube site, but as soon as that happens, we can send this out via email.
Can I ask a question? Sorry. I didn't put it in the chat. I just had my hand up.
Sure. Do you
Um,
mind if I finish this slide really quick and then we
Sure.
can take
Yeah, that's fine.
questions?
Yeah.
Salesforce launch. So I did send out an updated timeline, possibly the end of May. That is not set in stone still. Still some things to be worked out in that sense. I truly hope it does happen in that time frame, but we'll keep you updated. And like I said, we will have training materials for how to use Salesforce in depth. This was just kind of a sneak peek. And also after Salesforce is launched, we will have some weekly office hours so that people can drop in. If you have questions, we can do screen shares, problem solve if you have any quirks with the system. And so we are going to offer that now in the future. And for now, I haven't been offering office hours because we've been kind of in a holding pattern. But if that's something that would be helpful or not, if you can put that in the chat just as feedback for us, if you'd like to have that bi-weekly or weekly, feel free to share that. Happy to have more communication with you all. I like getting your feedback, interacting with you. You're what has helped to make this program a success so far. And so, yeah, happy to host that if it would be helpful. And then now, yes, plenty of time for Q&As. We have about 10 minutes here. Stacy, go ahead.
So my question is just going back to the donor contribution page. Right
Okay.
at the beginning of the demonstration, there was the part where there was like a, where the donor would choose the name of the nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Was all that information transferred over from EZ, or is that something like, do we have to set up a new account?
Good question. So with the Enterprise Zone, we basically have your name, your organization name, and your tax ID and your contact. So like your email contact. There's a lot of information that once Salesforce is launched that we will ask you to fill in.
Okay.
So there's a lot of blank fields for your profile that we will be asking you to complete once Salesforce is launched.
Okay. Thank you.
And if anyone does have a question about their project name, it actually is listed on our website. We have on the website, we have a list of approved nonprofits and projects. And so if you look there and you're like, I don't really think this project name is accurate. It was like that with Enterprise Zone, but it really isn't accurate anymore. We can look at just changing the name for that. And then Rachel, do you have a question?
Yeah, so when a donor goes in and submits their information for us to approve, will there be a notification that goes out to us when they've submitted it, or do we just need to check that periodically?
Yes, I believe so. There should be a notification.
Okay, thank you.
And Stacy, did you have another question, or is your hand still? Okay. So it looks like a couple folks would like office hours now. We can definitely make that happen. Marianne.
Hi, this is Sharon. I just had a question. During your demo on when the donor input, you did a search on the social security number. But I thought one of the benefits of having the donor do it was we wouldn't necessarily have the social security number.
No, we'll still need the full social security number.
Well,
The
I know
benefit-
they need to input it, but we wouldn't necessarily have it as a nonprofit.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct.
So we couldn't necessarily search on the social security number. Can we search on name or some other way?
Oh, I understand your question. So the contribution, when you pull it up, it automatically has the social security number there. So you don't actually have to manually enter it.
Okay.
Yeah. If you don't have it on file, you won't be able to double check that piece of data. But yeah, you won't have to manually enter it.
Okay.
Her question was on the page where you're checking the contribution for accuracy, it pulls up the donor's social security number, and that's the identifier. She was concerned about being able to see, not having that donor's social on file, and so wouldn't be able to enter that in. So that was the question for who wasn't able to hear. Do you have already created forms, letters that we can mail out to our donors? We do have a donor flyer that talks about kind of the transition from Enterprise Zone to HCTC and the need for us to collect the social security number. And then for this donor facing form, we will create guidelines for this form for how to complete it. So Abigail, does that answer your question or meet the need that you're trying to look for there? The donor information form is on our HCT website. And we can put a link in the chat. So this is the HCTC website. Pending a makeover, but we do have some helpful links here. Donor information goes to the flyer that we created that you can download with some just basic information. And then FAQ document is here as well. So if you do have questions about how things work, there are lots of wonderful questions that have been asked that we've curated there as well. And then this is where you would actually click on the contribution form, and it would take you to the contribution form that we shared earlier in this presentation. And then Anne asked if you can submit biannually. No, we're asking for submissions quarterly, just so that we can have our information as updated as possible. We do have to submit biannually to the Department of Revenue, so we want to be able to be accurate as possible on and being updated on our data in the system. Will there be a year-end summary generated for each donor if the nonprofit does not choose annual? That's a good question. I could look into that possibility. I don't believe that's occurring right now, but we'll make a note of that. What number do we call for office hours? So, my thought on office hours would be, it would be a Zoom meeting similar to this, and we will email out the phone number if you'd like to access that by phone. But yes, at any time, if you do need to reach us, both Sydney and I have phone numbers as well if you do need assistance right away. So, Bill, is that what you were asking about for the general office hours, or?
Yeah, well, the reason why is this is my first Zoom meeting with you, and so I'm trying.
Okay,
I'm not familiar with a lot of the things, and I just don't want to take up the time to ask while everybody.
Okay.
Here.
Okay, we can get back with you and to touch base with you on getting you caught up on some of the information. Yeah, I can include our general email as well.
I think I have your email,
Okay.
that you gave on this Zoom and your phone number, but.
Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, if you can reach out to me, we can get you some previous information that was shared so that you're caught up
Okay, thank you.
for sure. If you have not submitted donations yet, yes, you can wait for Salesforce to submit at that time. Yeah, that's up to you and your organization. Like I said, I think it might be helpful to do just one test run because you never know what questions might come up, but we're not requiring that by any means. That's just kind of what I've seen in talking with a few different nonprofits. So. Can donors submit their gifts outside of the quarterly deadlines? Absolutely. If you mean before the deadline, we would strongly encourage, we would strongly encourage those contributions for that quarter to be entered prior to the deadline. Yeah, I mean, for those late submissions, I understand that even with the Enterprise Zone program, sometimes into the next year, if somebody was filing taxes late, they might even try to get a tax credit for the previous year. And so in those circumstances, I would hope that it would be a very rare occurrence, but as long as your organization hasn't met your maximum limit on tax credits, then we would have to honor that submission. What is the deadline after the end of the quarter? That would be 30 days after the end of the quarter, or about a month after the end of the quarter. Andrew, I see your hand. It was kind of blending in there with your background.
Yeah, I did an analog one as well with my digital there for you. Thank you. So my question is, we had a threshold. We were in the Enterprise Zone program, and we had a threshold where our donors had to meet a minimal level to be included in the program. And as their donations were accumulating through the year, you wouldn't necessarily know if they were going to pass the threshold or not. What is the context of that in this instance where you're asking us to put in donations quarterly? Does this program have a threshold? Are people doing the threshold approach? I'm just trying to understand the nuance of that.
Yes, there is a threshold for donors of $100,000 in tax credit for the tax year.
That would
And
be
so-
total, though. I'm talking about just to be able to, because we weren't giving a tax credit on every donor. It was just people that were at least coming up to $250, let's say. Then
Okay.
we include them in the program, but you don't know earlier in the year if they're going to get there or not. So how would you know to include them in your quarterly
Mhm.
reports or quarterly additions of donors.
So for someone who has like a monthly gift of less than $100, those would only be able to be submitted once they hit that threshold of $100. So if someone gives $10 a month, they wouldn't be able to submit that until 10 months into the year. And so that's how that would work. You wouldn't be able to submit those earlier in the year because in order to issue the tax credit, they have to equal at least $100.
Okay, I got that. So are we allowed to set our own threshold organizationally as participation in this?
Yes.
So let's say I set the threshold at $250 and I have a donor that's getting there slowly, but by the end of the year, they've given us 4 donations and they've only given us $200. But I didn't know that they were going to make it or not. And I've already put them in their donation into the system quarterly as required so that we're staying up to date with you. But it turns out that at the end of the year, they didn't make it to my threshold. And I don't want to have to go to the trouble of issuing them a certificate or including them in the program because they didn't meet the threshold. And we're trying to keep the amount of work we do to a minimum.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. When you got a quarterly requirement to include people's donations in, how do you know they're actually going to pass the threshold by the end of the year to be included in the program?
Yeah. So I would say only submit it once they've met this threshold, and we can make that clear in our guidelines. But yeah, if they're possibly not going to meet that threshold for the tax credit, their contribution should not be in the system. And in fact, Salesforce is not going to approve that contribution unless it is at least $100. I understand if you have a higher minimum than that, then that's going to be on your administrative tasks of not entering that quarterly until they meet that $250.
Okay, thank you. So what I'm hearing you say is it's okay not to include some people in your quarterly updates or your quarterly numbers if you're clear that they might be on the bubble, or you're going to wait till they're past the bubble to include them.
Yes.
Okay.
They must, yeah. If you submit something, it must be at least meeting that minimum threshold.
Okay, thank you.
And it looks like we are past time. So, and Lil, we'll touch base with you. I see you just put a question in the chat. We will touch base with you individually to get your questions answered. For
Okay,
sure.
great. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for everyone's time today. And yeah, more details to come via email, but as always, reach out to us. And thank you so much. I hope you have a good afternoon.
Thank you.